Welcome to the Civic Circus podcast. I am Spencer Duncan.
And I'm Chris Schultz.
Let's start the show.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Chris, thank you for being here. We know each other, but we don't really know each other. Is that a fair way to put that? We've gotten to know each other a little bit, but we should probably get to know each other better. I think we would get along. I actually have, in this room that we're doing this, there's a bunch of file cabinets over here. And somewhere in there is when Chris and I both ran for mayor 8 years ago now. I have one of your palm cards. I kept everything from that election, from my stuff, other people's stuff. So somewhere in that cabinet is your picture and your palm card.
All right. Very nice. So, I can't believe that's been 8 years.
I know, me either.
Just the time flies so much.
It's kind of amazing when that stuff happens. You're like, wait, 8 years?
Yeah. It's been wild. A lot's changed in 8 years.
It's a good thing for me to remember because it's the same year I got married. So it helps you keep the timeline and not forget. How long have you been married? Oh, 8 years. That's easy to remember. That's the way I mark it. So I also got married the day before my wife's birthday. So if I forget them both, I'm in big trouble. Versus, so good news is I shouldn't forget both of them.
It's like if you're born on Christmas Eve.
So do you still do stuff down in Branson?
Yeah. I have a lot of friends in Branson, and we actually have a product called the Branson Family Passport that we work with, which helps people get more out of their vacation dollars, from hotels to shows. It has 50% off show tickets, and just so many of our partners in Branson. After that election, I spent a little time working with Branson, about 5 years. I was living there, doing the dreams, and finding out what it was like, and finding out that it's such a great community of people. And then, touring around. I was with illusionist Rick Thomas, and we would go everywhere. We'd spend a month in a casino. We'd be living there, and I don't gamble. I really don't drink. So it's like, what do? I study the business of it, and I kept thinking, there's so many things that I was seeing other places that I said, man, it would be cool to have this at home. And so that's why when we came back and started working on Cosmos Court, it was a long process to do that, but taking the time to be able to put so many different, pieces of the puzzle together.
That was one of those random things that came at you in life, right? That you didn't expect. Suddenly you're doing one thing, and next thing you know, you're helping an illusionist in Branson, right? One of those life takes you on these roller coasters and trajectories.
And I'll tell you, and then it changes one way, and then it changes back so quickly, because when the pandemic hit, we were actually in Vail, Colorado, and we had driven all the way there and got there, and they said, get back on the bus. And they had they were one of the hot spots that broke out. It was that Friday the 13th time, the day before that, and everybody was panicking in that area. And that was one of the hot spots that shut the country down.
Interesting.
So, and then
you were at the hot spot.
And right before that, we were in Las Vegas, and the plan was to bring the show back to the Tropicana, which Rick had been at for 15 straight years there. And so that changed. And then, of course, we had Field of Greens in the break room running here, and that changed. And so, you have to come back and get back to your roots. And we were about to go to Las Vegas and move the show there. And then it just changes. Everybody that we'd made the deals with, they all were gone. And then, with the rest is history.
And now the Tropicana's gone.
I
was actually in Vegas a few weeks ago, and they're building a big baseball stadium there now. It's kind of crazy.
It is really crazy.
It's weird.
Yeah.
So I ask everybody who comes on, you're from Topeka, but talk about your connection to Topeka. So you were born here, but just talk about, and you're still here. That's choice too, right? I mean, so just talk about your Topeka journey.
I was born and raised in Topeka, and just the tie in with that, there's so many people that it's the people, really. When you go to school with people, those people grow up, they have kids, they all do things. And then you really think about, where do I want to spend my energy and my time? And one of the things, if so many people who are really hard on Topeka are people who haven't lived anywhere else. That's one of the first categories. And I was one of those people until I really took the time to get out of here. And I wasn't so hard on the place. I mean, I've always loved it, but just to be able to say, where's home for me? And going around to every, these theaters we were working with, these are hardworking people that we would go in. You're talking about unloading trucks, doing the work with people who work on this hard work every single day. And you get this perfect picture of what it's like in their communities, what they're talking about. the guy in Florida wants to get to New York,
Yeah.
and the guy in New York wants to get to Florida. And, you really asked that question, or I did, where is home? And I said, well, that's where there's more love for me than there is anywhere else in the world. And that comes back to Topeka. So once you make that realization, it becomes easy to realize that this is home. There's so many things, opportunities that I had to be able to do the things that I was able to do, that, I look at the world today and I'm like, so many of those things are gone.
Yeah.
How do we keep those things around, for the younger generations who, really didn't get the same kind of fun that you and I got.
Right. Yeah, because it is different.
That's how we become
different.
human,
Yeah.
So we have to get people out and come back together and do those things that, kept us human or made us human, that we're pack animals,
Right.
So, seeing all the stuff that's happening downtown, in that time, the events that are happening downtown, there's thousands of people that are coming down here and gathering together. It's really exciting. This is a good place to be. There's so much uncertainty going on in the world right now, but this is a good place to be. Really, this is a good place to be. There's a lot of really good people here that want to make the best decisions and really do want to care about the community. It's not so political.
Right. Yeah. I think being stubborn can be good and bad, right?
Yeah.
There's a level you reach where if you're too stubborn, it becomes destructive to yourself. But if you're a certain right of stubborn, sometimes it's why you keep like, okay, I'm going to try again tomorrow. I'm going to try, right? It's that stubborn streak. And the reason I bring that up is I think I lean a little towards more, I tell my wife, if I'm leaning towards destructive stubborn, you got to knock me over the head. But if, which is why, but I think, and I apply that a little to you in this respect, is you had ups and downs in downtown with the various businesses and struggles. Some of them not your fault at all. Some of them the city's fault at one point. I don't think I'm allowed to say that, but I'm going to say it anyway. But I mean, with construction and stuff, but you were like, all right, I'm coming back. You could have just closed up shop, moved to one of those other places and said, I'm done with you, Topeka, but you didn't.
I am stubborn.
I mean, and that's why.
I didn't fall in love with the government. I fell in love with the people.
Yeah, and that's
why we're here. That's why we work with that together.
But that's a big question. Why didn't you just throw up your hand and say, enough, Topeka? This is exhausting.
I certainly feel like anybody walking in my shoes would probably ask themselves that question of why they would want to come back. And all I can say is, like, when you're going through a lot of this stuff that are just unthinkable things that change your life, and you have to ask that question, why? Suddenly, someday you get that answer. And so the older we get, the more we realize that all those things that we went through have been setting us up for something that is, very special, and you realize that those things that happened to us have made us stronger, and it helps us get through where we're trying to go. And that it puts us to the place where, you can look at those experiences and say, if I didn't have those, I would not be as wise as I am. Or I don't know how wise I actually am, but those experiences have built me into the person who can handle what I'm doing and have set me up for some really good things. Yeah.
But it's good because if we don't have people like you who are willing to have those, rough times and still keep at it to get to some success, we would lose out a lot in this community. We wouldn't have some of those things like your businesses and the investment you do and the things you do in the community to add to it. We'd be very barren and much less than we are at this point if folks like you just said, cool, you don't want me here, fine, I'm out, and I'm gonna go try it somewhere else.
That's the one thing we found out that we had in common back when we were running in 8 years ago, is that we're both stubborn in a really good way. In a really good way. That we have to be, we can't give up. And that's what it's all about, is keep going back and learning and moving. And today might not be the day, even though we want it to be the day. It might be 2 weeks from now. It might be a month from now. It might be 10 years from now. But whatever's happening, I really try and look at any of those negative things that have happened to me and say, why did that happen? And then suddenly, sometimes, something in my life answers the question. Not when I want the answer, but usually it makes it pretty clear that this is why. Yeah.
Topeka seems to love comedy, which sounds like a silly thing to say because there are communities where it doesn't work as well, or it's different and you can't. But anytime, whether it's what you're doing now, what you used to do at the break room, what you're doing now at Cosmos Court, and you can talk about that with that you're actually doing comedy nights and events. But even when places here, whether it's, I know it's not Topeka, but Prairie Band has someone, or T-Pack, comedy does well in Topeka.
Yeah.
As opposed to some other community. I know that sounds silly to ask, but you've now done it for a while. Do you know why Topeka loves comedy more than maybe some surrounding areas, or why we have found a little niche there?
We've found, and this, I remember when I'm going to say Vicky Tremblay. I don't know if you know Vicky.
Yeah.
She's hilarious.
Yeah. I go to Laugh Lines a lot.
Yeah,
all the time.
she came to me, like, she was in Laugh Lines for a very long time, and I can't even remember how many years it is. The years just pile on. But she came to me and said, "There's really no place to be able to do stand-up comedy, and how do people get better at it? And we need to, do this." And I said, "Okay, that's." They could say you're somebody who was in the ground floor of getting this comedy thing started. And I said, "Whoa, the only thing I did was say, okay."
Yeah.
Like, I gave the space, we had the thing. That's what I did, and then we showed up and we kept sticking with it and we grew something. And, it became an ecosystem that allowed people who have an interest in it to be able to get on stage and get a taste for it. And then something that allowed them to grow, and then something that allowed them to achieve to something. So you've got open mic nights, you've got competition nights, and then you have every Friday night at Cosmos Court, we do our Friday Night Funnies, which is our headline spot. So a lot of people, there's an ecosystem now that allows people who have an interest to be able to start in something and to be able to make it to there, to be able to also be one of the people who performs with the people who travel through. So it just kind of gives so many opportunities, to so many people who got their start on stage at the break room. Or they love that. And we've established ourselves as a town that, we can bring in comics, and we're on that circuit, and there's a lot of really good comics that come through.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to give it away on this podcast, but I have this idea for this comedy competition we could do in Topeka. It'd be pretty unique. We'll talk about that. But I'm not giving it away. I'm not giving all the good ideas away on the podcast. But
I say yes.
I do think people would be surprised, and I've learned this over the last couple of years about how many people there are in our community who do go to open mics and are trying stand up. Even they're not going to. They know they're not going to hit a bigness, but they just enjoy doing it. People you wouldn't even expect who will get up and, I can tell 5-10 minutes of jokes, and they're pretty funny. And we do sort of have that little underbelly that quietly exists in Topeka that I think would surprise a lot of people.
Absolutely. And there's so many of those little niche markets, like the comedy group, that we do that every Friday night. Yep. After that, we call it Cast Party Karaoke. So it's a karaoke bar. We have a comedy club, a karaoke bar, we have a dance club, we have an events room. We can do so many different things that are versatile and provide a lot of things. The pizza is incredible at Cosmos Court.
Yeah.
And there's so many things that we've got that bring needed items to downtown, that if we want to become that metropolitan area, and we're doing that. All these new residential spots that are coming in down here, this is good news. There's a lot of good news. Despite the world falling apart, around us, there's a lot of good news happening in Topeka.
Yeah, there's a lot of housing.
I tend to look at that.
There's a lot of housing that's going to happen, not just the one that they've broken ground on, but a couple other developments they're talking about that I think are going to happen that are we're going to go from first of all, there's a lot more people living down here than a lot of people realize to begin with.
Yeah.
And then you suddenly add what I think over the next 3 to 4 years could be 500 to 700 new housing developments that will fill up. And suddenly that's a much different, landscape for this area than it was just, right now.
You can live, work, and play at that point. There's so many different options for people. That's what you have to be able to have, that urban core where a young professional can come into Topeka and not have a car and be able to have everything that they need right in that area, live, work, and play there, and be able to get their job done. And I think we're really on the right path to doing that.
So tell people who haven't been there, and they should, I walk by, grab a food here. It's all right. The pizza is good there. But what Cosmos Court is, and then where that idea came from.
So build it as a community celebration center. And that's the big overarching thing. It has a food court, and I call it a maker space for food, because you get to make whatever you want, however you want, whenever you want it. And that was meant to really answer the call of, we have a lot of people who work in offices down here. We have a lot of people who live down here. We have a lot of needs that need to be met. So how do we provide that variety to them? And that's where we started. And then it progressed into, how do we get these events going? How do we do more of that? And that we had to, one piece at a time. We're starting something that was brand new. When you're talking about coming up with pizza, you got to figure out, like, how are you going to do it? How are you going to do it consistently? And if you get hit really hard, how are you going to put that together? And like, how are you, all that stuff takes time and development. And we all want it to be immediate when you open the door, but taking the time to be able to make sure that people are coming in and you're throttling that experience is something that we did along the way to get here, and I'm glad. And because right now I feel like we just had last weekend we had our busiest day ever. We set a record, and it keeps getting better. So yeah, we're loving it.
Well, I hope being across from the hotel helps you too, because I had some friends staying there, and we were over there hanging out. It was like 9 o'clock, and we're like, "Hey, it's open. Let's go get." We went in there and grabbed some food at 9 o'clock at night in downtown or whatever.
The amount of people that show up that come in, we have late night pizza. We stay open until 1:11 on the weekends, and the amount of people that are staying at the hotel who are in town for work or whatever it be. They're often not ready to go to bed yet, or they want some pizza, or they just want to stumble into someplace fun. And that's what we're giving people is in that experience that can basically be whatever it needs to be when it needs to be it. And our presence from that hotel's, the Cyrus is a great hotel. And I think it's something we all should be really proud of to have in the community. And just the location of, you don't even have to wait at a signal. You just walk right across the crosswalk and you're in our door. Like, it's the best thing. But, we also took that into consideration when trying to build the place as well, because that's what it is, Where are we? What is needed? And I think that's something that, looking at, the development and future development for downtown is really to go backwards to go forwards and take our history and know where we are and have that appreciation for what our roots are as a community, and then go forward with that. Because if we look at the things that we have here, there's some really great assets. We just need to tell the story a little bit better. Yeah.
So you went to Washburn, right?
I did.
Theater.
Yep.
So was your goal to be a performer, or to transition a lot more what you now, which is be the behind the scenes guy who facilitates all the performers?
So my emphasis was I did it all. When you go to college for theater, you have to do every part. Yeah. But my interests were in stage management and direction. Okay. And then so that translates into pretty much every. And I think that gave me a competitive edge in business because so many people go to business school and they're all taught exactly the same way to look at it. Yeah. And when you're in theater, you are taught that there's no one person that's more important than anybody else, and it's really a good team environment. And that's what I like to create, around where I'm at, and with our employees and our customers, is that this is this team environment where the whole thing works because everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, and it really did, I think, give me some different insights that made me able to be a little bit more competitive in business.
Yeah, it makes total sense. You're right, because everyone's taught this is the way to do it.
Yeah.
You gotta have some outside the box.
Exactly.
Different way to look at things.
Yeah.
You figure out the business part.
Hey, I have a sister who's an accountant,
right.
so
right. See,
I had that covered. I didn't need to double it up.
Just look at these books, please. Yeah. She's like, oh gosh, all right, man. Only because you're my brother.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, I know how that goes. So, anything else you want to push out that you want the world to know about? That I missed something, or
it's just a good time. I really hope that people can be more positive about where they're living and what they're doing, and get out. Get out. Put the devices down. Not right now, because you're obviously listening to this podcast,
that's right.
But
put the earbuds in and walk around.
Right.
First.
Yeah. Get your family out and enjoy these things that are happening while we have them. Because the more we support these things, the longer they can exist, and the bigger they can grow, and the better they can serve. So, but it does take our involvement, and it takes the involvement of everyone in the community to actually show up.
I think the point you made earlier was interesting. And so, I mean, I've lived in Topeka I'm born here, lived here most of my life. But when I graduated college, I did live in Austin, Texas for a little bit. First job out of college. And then I went to Rocky Mount, North Carolina for a little bit. And then I ended up in Emporia, Kansas, came back before I ended up back in Topeka. And I do think, and then I've traveled a lot for work. And I do think that perspective has helped me recognize, as you get out to other communities, similar sizes, and you realize, okay, these are the things that are truly unique to Topeka problems, so that we should address them that way. And these are the problems people complain about. Their complaints are valid, but I'm like, yeah, we're not alone. That is a universal problem that has existed in every city I've been to, and that doesn't mean we can't figure it out, but at least I feel like, okay, it's just a infrastructure problem. It's just a bureaucracy problem. It's just that doesn't make it right, and that still makes the concerns valid, but at least I feel better, like, okay, it's not just us. But I do think it's helped me, both just as a citizen of Topeka and then being on the council, be like, okay, which is this? Is it Topeka specific or sort of a universal problem?
Right.
Yeah. And you're right. That helps, I think, with perspective.
It does.
And so you try to remind people that, because you don't want to invalidate their concern and frustration, because that's not what I ever want to do. But I also sometimes do have to say, you're right, and we're going to fix it, but that's not just a Topeka problem.
Right. That's exactly. Exactly. Potholes are everywhere.
Right. So when you tell me this city never does it that way, I'm like, actually they do, but that's cool. We can still do it differently. It's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. That is something, traveling around, working in other cities and seeing what it's like and seeing what their problems are and seeing which problems we don't have makes me a lot more appreciative, and you don't know it. You talk about going into many downtown areas, and ours is pretty easy to navigate through. By comparison to many others, and so but if you are stuck in one particular mindset or one thought process and not willing to see or able to see, or no one's explained to you well enough, or however it is, what's possible with it, you tend to see the frustration, and that's about it. There's so much good that we need to be seeing.
Yeah, there is. It's hard. But
it
it's
is.
Fine. We'll get there.
So many people are hurting right now. Yeah.
Well, right. That's
really.
the thing. And so it all becomes kind of jumbled. I try to parse through it. Like, where can I really help and where can I not? But what's your most immediate problem? And let's get you on a happier path.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And you gotta get the lows before you can understand the highs. And then in order to be useful for other people who are going through those lows as well. If you've been there and they know that you've been there, and they know that you've gotten out of it, that gives hope. That gives hope to other people. And to me, that's what I want to be. I want to be a symbol of that. Whether people have seen my struggles, I want to be that symbol of hope to say, hey, we can rise like the phoenix. We can do wonderful things, and in spite of what happened to us or how it happened, it just like this last weekend, going out and I've been an advocate for the LGBT community for a long time, and we had, they were saying 4,000 people downtown.
Yeah, there
were supporting the Pride Palooza thing.
Yeah,
that's huge.
Yeah.
That was
that's
really
enormous
huge.
growth from.
Absolutely.
I know for that event it's just newer, but there's been similar over the last couple of years style of events, and that's a lot of growth.
I used to work with that back when we had to hide out and not be able to be public at all, and and now we actually get to be something. And like I said, regardless of what goes on nationally, that is a huge positive step in the right direction for Topeka. And the people that are here.
Yeah. Well, I ask every guest to bring a couple questions. I never know what they are, so this is your chance to ask away.
Okay, so I was challenged with this, and like one simplest question that I put out that is, why do you want to be the mayor?
Yeah, no, that's a totally valid question. And you think about that a lot when you run, partly because you're like, I got to have a good answer. But then you actually have to look inside yourself and be like, why do I really want to be mayor? Like, what is going to drive me to actually put in the time and go around begging my friends and family and everybody, please vote for me and please support me and please attach your name to mine, which, that's a scary thing when you do to people. So I have done a lot of that, soul searching to speak. And the generic easy answer, which is true, the first part is, as we've talked about, this is where I'm from. And I've always looked at Topeka and said, my background and my skill set is this, right? We all have that thing we think we can do, or what we've trained for or educated for, or whatever. And I think this is a way I can serve. It's not the only way, but I do think in my day job, working in government affairs and my education with businesses, I feel like I've reached that point where I can, as mayor, provide the service to the citizens of Topeka in helping move what they need done forward. I've built to that point, and I want to do that because I'm from here, and because I tell people all the time, I have friends and family still all across this community. No one holds me more accountable than they do when you're in the grocery store.
True.
And I don't want to let them down. I don't want to let anyone in Topeka down, but I really don't want to let them down because, they're the ones I went first grade. I've known you since first grade.
Exactly.
I want to make sure you have the best life you can have because I have known you since we were 6 years old.
And that their kids have the opportunities, the same opportunities that we had.
Yeah. And if I can do that as mayor and help everybody, but, in that mindset of, then I really want to do that. I think the second piece of that is why do I want to be mayor is, and I try really hard not to throw past and current mayors under the bus because I really like Mayor Padilla. I told him, if you're going to run again, cool, I'm not running for mayor.
Right.
Run again, man. He's done a really good job. But I do think as we transitioned over the last 20 plus years to a city manager form of government, there's very much this perception that the mayor just cuts ribbons. And that's part of it. That's absolutely part of it. We have ceded a lot of things to the city manager. But I also think we haven't had a mayor who's fully embraced their ability to go out in the community, listen to what people say, like, what do you really need? Take that back to the council and the city manager and say, why are we prioritizing A, B, and C when I'm hearing it's X, Y, and Z? And I think it's the mayor's role to really say, to fight, to make those repriorities and push the council and the city staff to say, I hear you. I understand why you want to do this. That's not what I'm hearing. As the mayor who's out there, who's elected by folks, who's being that community voice, we got to flip the script. Yeah. And I think we really need someone who's willing to do that and put themselves out there on behalf of the people and just say, let's do it. And I don't think we've always had that as much. And I think that's partly just come with growth of figuring out this city. It sounds silly to say, well, we've been doing it for 22 years now. We should have it figured out. Yeah, but we're 100 and plus years old. In the history of government and time, that's not very long to figure these forms of government out. And I think we're finally doing better. So that's the other reason. I think that role can serve as a driver of a lot of issues and people who feel underrepresented in City Hall, that their voice isn't there. And that's easy to say, right? Everybody likes to say, oh, your voice will be heard. But I hope in the things I've done as a council person, I've shown I really will do that, because I try to have taken those steps in the 6 years I've been on the council show. No, I don't just say it. I mean it. And I tell people all the time, there's things I've taken to City Hall that are now ordinances that, I mean, I have to take credit for them because my name goes on them, but I'm like, this came from a constituent. I was at open office hours. They brought this to me. I said, what a great idea. Why are we not doing that? Right. And I think we do. It'd be nice to have a mayor that does that. It's like, great. I heard this when I was at a meeting. Why is it not part of our
Such a unique position that brings the humanity into the government. You know, you've got the legal system. You've got all the other things, but an elected official brings that humanity.
And they can. And you can be the kind of elected official you want to be. And I will, if people complain about other elected officials, I always say they're going to be who they're going to be. I represent the people who elected me in terms of, so as a councilman, that's my district, and I represent all Topeka, but that's all I can do. And if I'm your mayor, then I will certainly represent everyone, but you have to manage that person. That's not my job as another elected official. I can just do what I can do because I got to work with everybody, and I want to work with everybody. And that's the goal. So those are the reasons why I think we can utilize that seat a little better and bring some stuff to the table. And I do just want to help all the people who I've told before. I said the people who threw dodgeballs at me in third grade, that's cool. I still like them and we'll get along. I still see them in the grocery store, and they always say, if you don't want us to keep throwing dodgeballs at you, Spencer, do better. I'm like, all right, I'm on it. I get it. I feel the pressure. It's cool.
Well, I'll tell you the second question I have for you. It's when you are reading articles, and they say don't read the comment section. Well, I do, and
I do too. And then I don't sleep for an hour and more. It's like, don't do it at 10 o'clock at night, man. Do it in the morning.
It seems like we can't say anything or nothing can happen without someone focused on hotel.
Yep.
And what do you think? Is this? Give me the what you think about that. And where we go, and what kind of hope we have for the forward progression of that.
So I don't know if this answer helps me or hurts me, but I can honestly tell you that the reason we aren't fixing potholes fast enough, or the reason there's certain things that aren't done, have nothing to do with the hotel. Yes, we have spent money on the hotel, but that money is not being taken away from infrastructure projects, which are paid through different mechanisms. It's not being taken away from something over here that you can't, right? The reason we're not fixing those things, those are conversations I'm ready to have and willing to have, and fair criticism. But I think that direct correlation when people say everything is, if they hadn't bought the hotel, it is
hotel and potholes.
Right. They are not, they don't have that direct connection. But then people are just upset about the hotel itself, which again, totally fair. And I've said before, I've told people before, I said, I don't have a time machine. I can't go back in time. At that time, we got some information that wasn't so great. We thought the county was going to be in with us. They weren't. We fired a city manager. That's not the reason, but we found out some stuff later. But I can't go back in time. Right. Would I have made the same choice? I don't know the answer to that. I know we had a lot of other hoteliers who said to us, we need to preserve that asset because the overflow business comes to us, and we can't lose the events at the event center. So that was our mindset.
It's an ecosystem. It's a piece of an ecosystem that needs to be.
And I wasn't going to go buy every hotel. Right? This is a very unique situation. And I've made 2 promises since from day one, which I've kept, is we're going to sell it. And I promise you, as we speak, there are very active negotiations happening. And we have told our city manager, don't put it in the 26 budget. It's going to be sold by the end of this year. And we are on that path. So that's good news. And I think that is going to get us our money back. So that's even better news. Woo! And we have put money into it, but we haven't renovated it. We've fixed the elevator. In fact, I think this upcoming, we got to fix a chiller, right? There's things we have to repair, but that's the job when you own something. You have to maintain it. Yeah. And so we have put that money into it, but I think we have a plan to get that back. So my goal is we'll just keep moving forward. We'll get the thing sold. But I do tell people there's not a direct connection. I also think it goes to what is always a very hard thing for me to decide is, when do you invest in what you consider economic development and not? Because I have people who are upset that we bought the hotel, but also upset we didn't save Heartland Park. And in that case, my point is, so you're not opposed to us making economic development decisions. You just preferred one over the other. That's a valid position, but at least understand, now we couldn't have saved Heartland Park. We actually tried to talk to the owner at the time to do some stuff. It didn't work out, and that was more of a county issue. But I use that as a parallel to say, so sometimes the conversations I have with people are more about, so you're conceptually we're on the same page. It's now where you want us to put those resources. And I struggle with that all the time, because if we don't put something into economic development, we are not going to keep bringing people to Topeka, both to live here and stay here, and tourists. And if we don't grow, we're not going to collect more sales tax revenue. And if I can collect more sales tax revenue, I can lower your property taxes and I can pay the bills, right? That's how I don't cannibalize my own people, is by making sure I have a robust, to your point, ecosystem that people want to participate in, to have a very diverse, tax economy. And so those are the things that go into those decisions. People got upset about it. Totally get why. And their feelings are not invalidated. And I promise I've talked about it with more people, and I will keep talking about it as much as people want. But there is not this direct correlation between those things. But you're right. That's a lot of what I see in those comments.
That's it.
If they hadn't bought the hotel, they had this fixed. I'm like, actually, the reason we have that fixed is.
But what does that have to do with a swimming pool?
Right.
Yeah.
So like I said, both feelings are valid. They're they don't need to be so connected. So
yeah.
But yeah, it's tough, because we're gonna have all kinds of, we're talking about riverfront development now. Yeah. And I've got just as many people have called me and said, don't you dare spend a nickel on that. Just who've called me and said, please, that's exactly what we need to spend money on. Economic development that builds a riverfront. So now that's the next challenge in front of us, is how do we find that balance between it? And I don't always have the answer, which is why I go back out in the community and I say, let's talk about it. Yeah. Tell me things I don't know, because I am not an expert on everything. Yeah. Wish I was, but my IQ isn't that high.
Yeah, they always say the smartest guy in the room is the one who says he doesn't know anything at all. Right. So hey, that's the one.
I've always said I don't want to be the smartest guy.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to surround in fact, I'm fine if there's 6 of us and I'm number 6, great. That means I've surrounded myself with people who are going to help me solve the problem. Let's get it done. Yeah. If you're the know-it-all, that's a problem.
The other issue, just to bring up, and this is an issue that's really hitting the whole world right now, and it touches the humanity of how we take care of our vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so many people are so close to being homeless themselves. There's so many things that we're seeing, and we're seeing an uptick here, not just here, everywhere. Yeah. And that's just we're seeing in every city is seeing that.
Yeah, it's a nationwide problem.
Like for Topeka, and who we are, and the giving, wonderful community that we are, how do you see us progressing to take care of some of the most vulnerable folks?
I always say this is one of those problems that goes back to every city struggles with it. No city's figured it out. Right. And there's a lot of reasons why. Some of them are economic, some of them are just societal, other issues. I think it goes back to, we can't pretend as a government we can solve everything or know everything. I think the first piece of it that we can address really well as a city and a government is addressing the affordable housing piece of it. so that less people are on the verge every day of becoming homelessness. So how can I make sure I have enough housing? How can I make sure it's affordable?
Preventative maintenance.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's step one, that their bills are being paid, that we can keep them in homes in our city. And that ranges from all types of things like building as fast as we can, because part of the reasons our rents are so high in this community is because there is a lack of product.
Right.
And so if I can get a lot more product, then suddenly, because we know there are people right now who would like to move, there's nowhere to go.
Right.
So the landlord holds all of that power to say, well, where are you going to go? And they're like, you're right. But if I have more stock and they can say, well, I'm just going to go 3 buildings down. Oh, crap, you're right. I better clean this place up and lower the rent and make it more marketable. So there's things we can do in terms of helping build that, help people with those programs. Where we are never going to be experts on is addressing some of those other underlying problems. But we have lots of resources in this community who are experts at that. So I want us to continue, instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, say, okay, and we're starting to do some of this. We've started this we've enrolled in this Built for Zero program, which is a national program that focuses on how a city can bring together in a more organized fashion all of its nonprofits and community groups to the table and facilitate that better. And it's worked in every community it's done. I think we're about 6 months in, which is about where we start to hopefully see some progress. But I hope then it's then working with them to talk to, and I meet pretty regularly with Rescue Mission and All Hands on Deck and United Way and all kinds of groups working on this to say, you tell me where the priorities should be. And instead of me trying to start that program, let's just give you the resources to do it, because you make the dollar stretch way more than we do in City Hall. I mean, they just, because they've already had to do it. They understand how to make a little become a lot.
Yeah.
And two, they already have the expertise. I don't need to go train a bunch of staff when I can just go to the Family Servants and Guidance in Vallejo. The people say, what more do you need so you can help a few more people, who have mental health or addiction issues? Or I can go to the All Hands on Deck people and say, great, you've got these, you're helping run MAP with the Rescue Mission, and great. What does MAP need to give people the resources? So I think those are the two things. If we break it down that way, we're going to find more success on addressing the problem. And it's taken us time to get there, because we had what I would call, for most of up until about right before COVID, really, and then COVID exacerbated things. Yeah. We had what I'd call a manageable homeless population. I mean, we were in that less than 200, which is a lot. It's always too much. But it was manageable. Rescue Mission could take in 120 to 150, depending upon what they could do. So they could help a lot of those folks. We had then the resources here within the city to help them. And then it's exploded to 600 just in the last 4 to 5 years. So it's gone, our resources haven't significantly improved. We don't have a bunch more money to spend on those programs. Rescue Mission doesn't have more beds. Those nonprofits aren't flush with new cash to help people. So the resources haven't expanded. And so our struggle the last couple of years has been to figure out, to your point, oh my gosh, how do we get this back down to a manageable population, with that. And I think we finally are making some headway on that. But yeah, that's been the problem. It just exploded on us.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. But that's it. We got to lean into, we just got to lean into the people who are here. And that's hard. I have had conversations with council members or two over the years, and they're all good people. And at the end of the day, they're okay with bringing people in. But there's that moment, I think, sometimes in government where you're like, okay, it's time to hand this off to the community group. And they're like, well, but what if they do this and this and this? Well, what if they do? I mean, That's the point. At some point, you have to trust in the community and hand that off to them and say, we trust you. You help us make these decisions. We're giving you the purse. We've just done that with our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It's taken us a while to get there, but they just had their first meeting. And that is a group of citizens, and they've got $1 million. And hopefully they'll get more. But it's like, yeah, I just handed a group of citizens $1 million, but I have to trust them. And I think sometimes we don't do that enough as a government in this community to say, here you go. And doesn't mean we won't watch you and participate and have a few strings attached, but let's go.
Yeah.
Let's trust in the community to know what's right for us.
It is a community issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. And what happens, when we're found in that situation, how if all of us just being one thing away from being homeless. I mean, there's so many things that can just happen to anybody at any given time. And to see that happen to so many people, we have to ask that question: what happens when this happens to our friends? What happens when this happens to us?
Yeah.
How are we treated? How are we? What do we do? And how are we taken care of? And how humanely are we treated? And those are big important questions.
They are,
Yeah.
and there are misperceptions out there, and I get it. People aren't randomly hanging out with homeless folks, and I don't expect them to, and I'm not asking them to. But I have recently spent time over at the MAP program, just hanging out as they're helping folks and talking to people and going over the rescue mission and just talking to people. And I went and talked with Barry Feeker, and as I was there, he's like, "Where you at?" Yeah, I go, "I'm out here talking to homeless individuals because I want to understand what got you in this situation. What do you think I can do for you as a city? What will you accept, not accept, and why? If you're not willing to accept certain help, tell me why, and maybe I can figure out, because you don't trust the government piece of it. Great. Which nonprofits do you trust? And let me communicate with them. And you learn a lot by doing that. Yes, there's obviously, I tell people, and this is a gross oversimplification. I'm always clear about that. Yes, there is a small group of homeless individuals who have just decided, leave me alone, I'm fine. And it's harder to help them because you want to respect their rights, but also I can't necessarily have you hanging out in someone's backyard, right? And so it's that balance. There are obviously some folks who suffer from mental illness or are dealing with addiction issues. The majority of those folks, though, want help. The problem is the help we can provide them isn't fully what they need. We can give them outpatient service, but they probably really need 30 days inpatient, because when they go to their meetings or they're getting the care and then they're right back in the situation that tempted them in the first place, I don't know that any of us can come that, right? And so we've got to do a better job to make sure that those people who want help in those situations get the exact help they need. And that's the failure on our part. We got to find that connection. So I hear people say, "Oh, they've got mental." Well, they do, but they want help. They just need it. And then there's that piece you'll talk to them, they're like, "I don't know how I ended up here. Yes, I was paycheck to paycheck, but I was doing fine. The next thing I know, something hit. I lost my apartment, lost my job. That's it. And here I am. And I've been here for 3 months, and I don't know what the hell to do." Yep. And that's when we can find, okay, great. Let me see if I can get you in. So there's not a one size fits all, but I do think there's some misperceptions. There's this, most of them are this or that. I'm like, there's a lot more normal, regular old people out there who have no idea how they got in this situation, that are more like you than you think they are.
Very true.
And once you realize that, it's a little different.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. That's a big thing for all of us,
Yeah.
And we've talked about, I think, the hot button issues, really you've laid it out, and that's the question, that you've got the answers, or you don't maybe not have all the answers,
right,
but you have good enough answers that I know that we're going to be in good hands.
And it really does come through conversations with everybody else, because I always harp back to the fact that I don't even trust anybody who walks in the room and says, "I got it all figured out," and I'll put initiatives out there and ideas, but and I'm always like, first of all, these are always fluid. They're not etched in stone. If someone says I'm wrong or a better idea, let's talk. But again, most of those come from these conversations. Hey, have you thought about this? Why didn't you think about this? And I'm like, you're right, I didn't, because I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a plumber. I'm not a guy who works on potholes on the street. Had no idea how that worked, but thanks for telling me, and let's make it happen. And
absolutely.
Yeah, I think too many people, especially elected folks, want to look like they have all the answers. I'm like, man, you can do that, and it works for some people, but I'm not going to pretend that way, because then you back yourself in a corner, and you can't get out of it after that.
No, be real. That's what we've got. That's what the world needs right now. Just real people trying to do the best they can.
And I have my grumpy days, and it's fine. Some days I'm like, not today. I don't want to talk about it right now. Tomorrow I'll be fine, though. I just need to go sit out back, drink something, and I'll be fine by morning. It's all good. It's been one of those days.
Sounds about right.
Right.
It's like the restaurant industry.
Right. Yeah, that's right. I know. Yeah, my brother's been in that industry his whole life too, and there's days I'm just like, good for you. Again, not my wheelhouse, man. I couldn't.
It's a service industry, really. It's trying to provide services to people, and unique experiences and things that they remember, that they do with their families and all that. And every small mom and pop restaurant does that. They give that experience that people need. That's what ties them to their community. And when kids go to things like that, that's the things that when our brightest kids, when they get to college and they don't have, Washburn's a great school. I'm glad I went there, you know, but for the ones who don't, we want them to be able to go there and then realize that home is here.
Yeah.
You know, we want them to come back here.
Yeah.
We want them to, you know, and come back and call this home. And that starts with the seeds that are planted in their minds when they're children.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
Well, we always talk about a couple issues here that are kind of on the forefront. And first one I want to talk about, we've touched a little on downtown, but we didn't really dig into downtown.
Right.
Redevelopment or development, whatever you want to use. I know when people hear this week, we've talked about some parking changes downtown that the council made. Most of them for now are minor. It's a little bit of an increase in the fee so we can help pay the bills. We're not going to put parking on Kansas Avenue. For now, we're going to keep the hoods on the side streets. I'd like to keep them on long term, but I got to go convince 5 other people that's a good idea and work that out. But parking's just, you know, you made a point earlier about how we do have kind of this nice downtown structure. And I do think a couple things have hindered us, and you'll know way more than I, but from my perspective is not representing downtown. But I've worked down here for years. My wife's business is down, our business is down here. So we have some connection in that respect. But I do think walkability, and this is a human problem. It's not just a Topeka problem. We actually have in this downtown a parking garage every 2 blocks.
Right.
You can park in one of those garages, and the most you would have to walk one way or the other to get to any business is 2 blocks.
Yep.
But everybody wants to park right in front of the business.
Right.
I always laugh that, you know, you can go to the gym and you can see someone driving around the parking lot looking for the closest spot right before they go do 5 miles on the treadmill. Right. Like that's just kind of like, it's just a mindset. And so I have no idea what the magic bullet is to get people to understand that if you want to have a thriving downtown, walkability is a piece of that. But I think that's one of the things that we struggle with convincing people.
Yeah, I do. I like to get out and walk it. And there's so many, as everything has developed, you know, over the years, it really has become a walkable thing. You know, the 6th to 10th Street area, you know, is that core. I mean, we need to think about it like it's our downtown mall. It's our open air mall. And what exists there, that's what we have to look at. What currently exists, how can we spark new life back into it? Sometimes it's hard for people to come into a situation and know where we were and how we need to get someplace else and where it's going to be better. They just have an idea in their head about what's best. Yeah. And that idea doesn't always gel with, you know, what's currently there and available, and how do we get the most out of that, you know?
Yeah, and now part of that has fallen on the city. Now we've actually putting some money into the parking garages now finally, and some of that's a very legitimate concern. There were some lighting issues, and so I get you pull into them. I tell people all the time. I said, as scary as you think they are, we don't have crime problems in our parking garages. We just don't. Now we monitor them, we watch them, we have cameras, so we've got security measures. But so if that perception's out there, I try to tell people that it's fair to feel that way, but I promise you they're very safe. But we also needed to maintain them better, and we finally done that with lighting and some other things. So hopefully people will start to feel like, oh, this is a nice parking garage, and I can park here and walk. Because I hope as downtown develops more, parking is going to get harder. You're going to have to use the parking garage if you want to come downtown, and don't be afraid of that.
Yeah.
The other thing I've seen through the years is I feel like sometimes we've had an identity crisis in the sense that we all, I think, agree mixed use is part of a thriving downtown. You're going to have some office space. You're going to have some people. You want people living there. Then you also want a nice blend of retail and restaurant. But I think at times we've had competing interests that have said, no, we need it to still be mostly office space. Or no, if we want to have a nice entertainment type district, that means we need to block off a couple blocks and say, these are the 2 blocks where it's bars, restaurants, entertainment venue. And then you can go back down to this area. I don't think we've ever figured that out, right? Like how we really want it to look like if we sat down with a map and said, yeah, between whatever it is, 4th and 10th or 12th, whatever you want to designate it on Kansas and the side streets, if we were going to kind of zone it, doesn't mean you won't have some other stuff mixed in there, but you know, would that benefit us? I don't know, but I feel like we've struggled with that kind of identity issue in terms of what we really want downtown to look like.
Yeah, I think the more people we can get out and walking around and then going up and down the street. I mean, we've got an open air museum down here. That's what we built. There's the pocket parks tell the history of the businesses. The bronze sculptures, they tell the history of famous people. You know, just the things that exist that make it an attraction that people have donated money and time to create. something for the community down here. It exists and it's down here, and we got to be proud of that.
Yeah.
And we got to keep doing more of it. But getting people out, health, getting people out of their offices and walking around, we've got a perfect, put some measurements for markers up of how far the distance is to walk. Tell people there's a free open air museum that tells the history of Topeka downtown, and it's in this loop. It's interesting because Cosmos Court, when you walk right in the front, there's this star.
Yeah.
And it's the Kansas Star, and it's in the National Registry listing for the building. And if you take that down to Evergy Plaza, it's the midpoint. Like it's right there in the midpoint of that whole set. Yeah. So if we really zoom in on that core and do something with that, and then that will spread.
Yeah.
That will
that's
definitely
good.
spread.
Yeah.
And our history's down. You got Constitution Hall,
Right.
We decided we're a free state here. You've got Great Overland Station. You've got Brown v. Board. Going back to your comment about walkability, how do we make those things walkable? How do we connect those things? And there's a lot of technology out there now that can be put into place that wasn't there 20 years ago.
Yeah.
We have autonomous vehicles. We have autonomous trolleys. We have all types of things that would be cool.
Well,
it would bring an experience to the area, and it would make it a lot more walkable, a lot more usable.
Yeah, especially if you could get in some kind of vehicle on one end, take it autonomous down to the other, and then if you want to say, I want to go over to Nodo, connect you over. Because it feels far because it's across the river, but, Nodo's only a mile away. The difference between downtown and Nodo is really only a mile, but that river makes it seem like it's so far, and it's like, it is, but it's really not.
Yes.
Like they're much more connected in terms of distance than people realize. Now, maybe with the new viaduct, I think there'll be some neat tunnels, and it doesn't mean people are going to walk it. But to your point, if we can find some creative, cool ways to connect people to go back and forth, it'd be pretty neat.
My deep dream that I think would be awesome for this, and I don't know how much of a pipe dream it is or not, but look at what we have. We say Constitution Hall, that's a big piece of our history. The Kansas Avenue is an open air museum for our city, and you got Rotary Park that's right behind Constitution Hall. Yeah. Why don't we put in a SkyTram? Why don't we put in a lift that takes you up and over to the Great Overland Station? So now, you could actually be in this area and you could zip right over there, and then it's done. That's walkable. That's an experience.
Yeah.
And I bring that up. It's a big idea, but this is well within the realm of what I've seen in other communities.
The downtowns that have developed, especially that have some, and it's what the riverfront folks talk about. They're like, look, the ones who have a river have used somehow to make it so when people travel there, even to the Oklahoma cities, and you go to other places like that, you're like, they've at least incorporated enough so it gives it some distinction. So when people visit or live there, they're like, yeah, it's kind of it's different. It's something we have that no one else has.
Yes,
and we've made it our own.
And Topeka's core, it wouldn't, without the river, we wouldn't exist. Or we wouldn't exist as we know today.
Right.
That's why we started. We had we had to get covered wagons across the river, and they put them on a thing, and they pulled the rope across. So it'd be kind of cool to be able to go to Constitution Hall and then take it over to another museum while they're telling you the story of the origins of Topeka and flying you over top of the route that they actually would take people and the whole core of the city.
I don't think the Topeka trolleys still exist. I don't know if they're in storage anywhere. I remember those old trolleys. They were pretty cool back in the day.
I've seen them. I know that I think there's one still around here, but it's not, the city doesn't have it.
No, I don't know who has it, but see, get those trolleys back in action.
They have options now, that are autonomous vehicles have changed a lot.
Yeah.
So we can lean into some of those things, and get back to our roots. Kansas Avenue had a full trolley system, back in the day. They found the tracks underneath.
They found the tracks underneath. Yeah. It was great. And if you look at some old pictures, you can see see it right through there. It's
making it walkable. That's a big thing.
Well, in Denver, they just took part of their downtown and they just closed it off. So there's a stretch of it where you can't you park but they have a little trolley that goes back and forth, and you can go from one end to the other, and they're like, great.
Yep.
So it's part walkable if you want to walk it, or it's not, but at least it's like, no, we're gonna keep traffic off of here.
And
I don't know that that'd work for downtown, but I mean, those are the kind of things to be creative and think of to see, what makes people want to utilize areas better.
Absolutely. And experiences that families can do that are unique, if you can get a family on an autonomous trolley and they can experience what that's like, or you can give them things that make them, that transport them, and really, tells the story of our community to them. Well, hear the story of Topeka, if you really go back to our roots and you find out the things and the decisions that we've made to be a community, I think we all can be proud of the decisions that we made.
Yeah.
As a community to become the people we are. We decided to, Kansas decided to become a free state. I mean, that's why we're the capital, you know, like because of these things that we made the right decisions. And I think that remembering those will make a lot of people who are from here a lot more proud about being from here.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I want to talk about, because we're getting close to 4th of July.
Yes.
So, in fact, I was at a meeting the other night where people are like, they're already shooting off fireworks. And I'm like, and part of the reason, especially when this comes out, is people will hear fireworks, is the state changed the state law that said if you don't have any law on the books, they can now sell 2 weeks earlier than they used to in the state, and they can even shoot them off. Now, city codes don't change. So in Topeka, you can still only shoot them off on July 3rd and July 4th. But in the county, they don't have the same rules. So they're already selling fireworks in the county way early. So, of course, people who live in the city go out in the county, buy some fireworks, come back in, start shooting them off, and then the dogs start going crazy, and people start calling the police and say, what the heck? So I do remind people, first of all, don't do it early or not too early. The police will come out. They will ticket you. You don't want a dang ticket for fireworks, right?
Yeah.
But I know it's very tempting. But one of our question of the week was, should we ban fireworks a couple weeks ago? And I got more yeses than nos, from people, because that's always, every time this time of year, that's the email I get flooded with, is like, when are you going to ban these things? When are you going to ban these things? And I'm always like, I get the issue. I always say, though, I would be a total hypocrite because ever since I was a kid, I have blown up stuff. Just fireworks. Let me be very clear about that. Just fireworks. But, so I don't want to be that hypocrite who's like, yeah, I'm with you. And then I go home on the 4th and be like, woo, shoot them off. Right? Like,
it really is something that a lot of people have PTSD.
They do. And that's a real...
Dogs and animals. And there's a lot of consequences that people have to be thoughtful about their neighbors with this, too. I mean, we want to celebrate. We want to, we definitely want to celebrate our freedom and our independence. But we also need to celebrate by being respectful of our neighbors as much as possible. So,
and as I get older, I don't want to become get off my lawn guy, but you do learn more and your perspectives change a little. And I've always had pets, so I don't want to diminish the pet issue because it does matter and it really does scare pets. But the PTSD thing, as I've talked to more people who've suffered from that, that has probably impacted me a little more to sometimes be like, maybe we should take a look at that. And, but I think there'd be as many people revolting against us if we got rid of them than if we didn't. So it is a struggle, but I do want people to know the city law hasn't changed, despite what the state did to us all.
There's an economy for it, and it's hard to take something completely away like that because you're taking away people's livelihoods. You're taking away, all kinds of things when you just ban something.
Yep.
So there's a lot of, deep-reaching ramifications to doing is that.
And there's a couple businesses that it's their business and they're making money. There's also quite a few groups in Topeka and Shawnee County who set up that thing and they make a little money every year and they use it to fund something that their nonprofit is doing as a fundraiser. And it does matter to their budget and bottom line every year. And so, you're right. You have to weigh that too as, again, as always with this stuff, what is that line and where's the right decision? And you're going to make some people happy and some people unhappy. And that's what it is. The fireworks tip I give every year, though, and this comes from our fire department. Every year you're going to see, and this is tragic, but a fire or two at a house. But it's usually not because a firework hit the house and lit it on fire. It's because people light them off, especially the big ones. They put them in their dumpster without hosing them down. They put the dumpster right next to the house, and then overnight it lights on fire inside that trash can and dumpster, and then it lights the garage or the side of the house or the carport on fire. So what I tell people is a couple things. First of all, hose them down,
right?
Stick them in the dumpster, and then push the dumpster out to the side of the curb. If it starts on fire, that's going to stink, but it's just going to burn out there.
It's not going to take.
And you're going to see it before it lights up your whole house.
Right.
So that is one of those. It makes sense when you hear it, but it's one of those tips. You're like, really? I'm like, yes, that is a number one reason as to why these places catch on fire is because people don't think of that step. So
it's true.
Hose them down and push it all out to the curb for a while until it's all cooled off the next day, and then you can put it back up there if you want.
Yeah, be respectful of our firefighters as well.
Yeah,
we can prevent a lot of this stuff.
Yeah,
and so we got to be smart. We got to be respectful of our neighbors and understand that if somebody has a problem with it, we don't let that make us push the gas to go against it. Like let's be as kind and considerate as we can of our neighbors. and clean up. Don't leave the stuff
clean up.
sitting
That's
out
the other
there,
big thing. Clean up.
There's always, anything you do, there's always going to be somebody who's going to mess it up.
Clean up,
But
right?
don't mess it up because we were dirty.
Right.
Don't mess it up because we were mean. Don't mess it just because we're supposed to be celebrating our freedom, and it's something really good that everybody wants to celebrate.
Only one time where I was shooting like a big thing off, and it flipped over, and my neighbors were watching, and it sort of started shooting at them, and they had to scramble for their life. But we're still cool. They understood. They were like, yeah, it's happened to us before. But I really felt bad about that one. It's like I was not trying to shoot fireworks at you while you were just hanging out watching the fireworks. But
that's right.
They were fast, so they got out of the way pretty quick.
It'd be a hard thing for your neighbor to forgive you for being the one who burnt their house down.
I know,
like,
right?
That's not something you want to put on your back.
No.
Yeah.
So that was good. All right. We always do an email of the week.
Yeah.
So I let the guest read the email of the week. Except
All right.
last week, my kid was on here. I read the emails.
All right.
There's your email of the week.
The email of the week is, hello, there are several lights I sit at for so long, sometimes 5 minutes, while literally no one else is on the road. Is anyone making sure our traffic lights work right?
I don't know. Do you have any stoplights you hate?
I have a list.
Okay.
I have a list.
Was this your email?
No, but I love whoever wrote this because this is a thing to consider. I've felt in downtown, like, do we, you have to push the buttons now. We switched some formatting there, so people end up standing there waiting, and they wait for a whole thing, and then they get to site, and it's like, somebody said to me the other day, they're like, oh, so you can be drunk to program these things, but you can't be drunk to drive through them? I'm like, oh, my Lord. No, it is something legit that we have to think about, like, getting out there and really walking those paths and saying, why are we doing things the way we're doing? Why is it set up that way? And how can we make it more walkable?
Right.
Those barricades.
Yep.
They're barricades. Nobody wants to walk across the street when the cross lights off, but I find myself saying,
if you're there for so long,
I'm going to do it. I have no choice.
No one's coming. I can make it.
Right. Don't find me for it. But if the light, if you can make it clearly across and it doesn't give you the opportunity, I get it. And I'm saying that as a pedestrian.
Right.
They're saying this is
sitting in their car. Especially, we've all said at that intersection, we're like, nobody else is coming. Why is this thing still red? And we do have a couple different types of lights throughout the city. We do have some that are activated by the button or when people are there for pedestrians. Majority of them outside of like downtown areas or some other areas are either activated by cameras that monitor the traffic flow. So sometimes when you are the only one in the left-hand turn lane and you're wondering why they passed you over once, it's because some computer AI made a decision that said that person can wait an extra minute because there's 100 other people that I need to push. I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but that it is sort of AI based. And then the others are just set on timers. Mm-hmm. What I tell everybody is, because I do get those emails every once in a while that's like, I waited 5 minutes, and I'm like, you might have. But honestly, next time you go through it, start timing it a couple times and then send me that. And two things usually happen. One, they realize, okay, it was only 2 minutes, but man, it felt like 5 minutes. Or sometimes they'll send it to me. And I'm like, oh man, that does seem a little long. And then I can send it on to staff and they'll go out and they'll do an assessment of the light. Maybe the timer's off. Maybe the camera's not working. Maybe it needs new parts or so they will do those assessments, but we have to give them like more than just, we don't like this light, go out there. So, and I've gone out to some lights too, people complain, and I'll go time them. So I can tell staff, it wasn't just a complaint. I went out there 3 times and it was 5 minutes. And even they're like, yeah, that's not right. We also do have a
break.
Right.
Things
and
do
we
break.
do have they're really expensive. Stoplights are hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And what stinks about them is I should have gone into the stoplight business because there's only so many companies who make them. So it's a very limited group of people you can buy them from. And of course, as technology has changed, it's not like you can just fix a spark plug, right? Like it is like, oh, the whole stoplight is out. We have to replace the entire light because the lights don't operate with this kind of box anymore. They have to connect. So we have to replace the whole dang thing because they have figured out how to get us because they know where else you're going to buy them. And you have to have stoplights, right? And so that's become an extra cost, but they can run $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 for just those stoplights you see out there. And so, but we do have a replacement program. Every year in our budget, we do put money aside and say, okay, these lights are old. We'll get them replaced this year and fixed. But yeah, so I do get everyone. But I tell people, tell me where the light is. Try to time it yourself. If not, I'll go out there and do it. It's fine. And then I can tell staff. And then sometimes I do go out time it myself, and I have to send you a back that says, I hear you, but I went through there 6 times and it was like a minute and a half. And they're like, well, it felt like forever. And I'm like, I get you. Trust me, I've been there. Like,
especially when you're late to something else.
Right. That's right. I think it does feel like forever though, when you are like late at night or early in the morning and no one else is there. And you're like, can I do it? Can I just, and you there's that piece of your brain that's, I'm going. And you're like, don't do it, man. Don't do it for so many reasons.
You feel like such a rebel.
Yeah. I will say it hasn't cut down. I will say our new police chief, when he came in, did hear the concerns of folks, not just as it related to speeding, but people running through stoplights. And that I think any of us who've driven in Topeka knows that had become a real problem. It's still a little bit of a problem, but he has put an emphasis on telling the patrol cars out there and doing some more traffic control to say, if you see it, don't let it go. Like, pull them over, either ticket them, warn it, whatever it takes, and let's go monitor some of that. And I think that's helped because now maybe the complaints have gone down because people are like, you're not doing anything about it. But I think it's also because I do want people to know the chief has put an emphasis on some of that traffic control issue because it had gotten pretty bad. You'd see it all the time, just people running the lights because they're like, they're not going to get me. Like, you're right. Yeah. Now there's a little bit more of that fear of, they might get me. You're like, yeah, that's right. You don't know
until
if
their car gets T-boned and somebody got them. You know,
we get questions a lot about. A lot of cities have traffic lights that can ticket you.
Yeah,
that's illegal in Kansas. That's a state law, and I have mixed feelings. There is a little libertarian streak in me that's like, yeah, I don't know if we need that. But then there's the other part that's like, we probably have a lot less of this problem. So I don't know where I fall on that. But luckily, I don't have to deal with it because the state has said no. So,
that's right.
So it's not an issue here.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, our question of the week this week. Last week, our question of the week was, do people watch the city council meetings? I had more people say yes than no, but I have a feeling that's because people who watch the city council meetings may also listen to this now a little more. So that's probably not a very good subset of. But I had people who were like, no, I don't watch them. Like, yeah, I might not either. I've always watched, even when I was younger and when I got on the council, even before I got on the council, which people said, you still got one on the council even after you watch those meetings? I'm like, yeah, I guess so. But this week, the question is, and we touched on the homelessness issue earlier, but there's a lot of talk about whether Topeka should support a low barrier homeless shelter. And we always talk about, I actually think I heard a new term instead of low barrier. I don't remember what it was. I'm going to have to go back and ask. But the concept of low barrier is slightly different in the sense that it doesn't mean anything goes. I think that's a misperception. Like, oh, you'll just let people come in and do anything. No, it means we recognize they may have an addiction issue or a drinking problem, and that's fine. We're still going to let them sleep there. They can't do those activities while they're there, but we're not going to kick them to the curb because whatever their issue is. We're going to help manage it and give them a place as we work with them to move them on. We had a consultant come in, give us 10 recommendations. They worked on the community. I do tell people we've actually done 7 of those 10 recommendations. The other 3, which we haven't completed yet, are a low barrier shelter, a tiny homes village of some kind, and then a one-stop shop. We've half done the one-stop shop, and the MAP is now this summer. For people don't know, like I've said MAP a few times, it's the group where a lot of organizations come together once or twice a week, and homeless individuals can go there and get various services, from pet care to health care from Stormont Vale, to be connected with different services they need. And so MAP is going to, at Let's Help for a couple months, see if we can create that area into sort of a one-stop shop. So we've half completed that. We're going to see how that pilot program goes and then see if it can evolve. But what the consultant told us about a low barrier shelter, which I do support, is it shouldn't be city-driven. And part of that was, and as I've looked across the country at totally city-run shelters, they don't work. Because you have people like me who get elected every couple of years and change their opinion, and city managers and staff come in and say, I don't want to support it, and we're going to cut all the funding. Whereas if you have ones that the community, the nonprofits come together and sort of build from the ground up and work with the community, where are we going to build it? How are we going to do this? And then you say to the city, what can we do to support you? Right. Maybe it's a little money, maybe it's a little security, maybe it's a little resources of some kind. Then those are more successful. So I've always said that's the approach I support, because I think that will actually work, and it's not all on the changing tides of government, day to day as to how we feel about something. Yeah. So that's the question: is do other citizens support a low barrier? I will tell you, I have had meetings with groups who are 100% for us building a low barrier shelter or supporting it. And I will say this to them every time. I say, that's great. Now let me tell you the number one problem. I said, all of you in this room support it, but if I told you I was going to build it near your neighborhood, what would you say? And they always get quiet because the number one problem we face with this is NIMBY, not in my backyard. Yeah. And that is the number one issue. And you can't build something way out in the middle of nowhere because people have to connect to the community and resources and grocery stores and doctors and all that stuff. But I also understand people don't want it right in the middle of their neighborhood. But at some point, someone somewhere in this city is going to have to work with the community. And that's what some groups are doing now to say, would this location suit everybody's needs and make the community feel comfortable with it? Yep. I don't think they're there yet. I think they're getting there. But that's the biggest problem. Even some of the biggest supporters still are like, well, I didn't mean near my house.
Yeah. Well, we have to have solutions, a variety of solutions. We can't say, oh, you have a drug problem, you got to go. You have an alcohol problem, you got to go. Because, you talk to people and you find out, okay, so the drug problem came as a side effect of being homeless. Maybe they didn't feel comfortable going to sleep because they didn't want what was going to happen to them if they fell asleep or feel comfortable doing it. So they did drugs and they started doing that so they stay awake so that they wouldn't feel like more of a victim. So there's so many things that if we can catch people earlier before they become homeless and they get down to that level, we can work on the drug problem at that point. But we have to have some kind of resources available to put people in the right place at the right time. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they all have to be in the same thing or whatever. But the idea of a one-stop shop is, yes, there is a resource tied to this. We can't make people who don't have a car drive all over town or walk all over town. And we have to understand what it's like for them. Maybe they get a check over here and they have to go over here to cash the check. And then we understand why that path, exists, and that's why they're where they are. We have to understand all of those things. So to get a low barrier shelter in here, I think we do need that, because the question, if by not having that, is what do you do with people?
Right. Well, I mean, there's people I can criminalize homelessness. Sure, if you want me to.
That's not going to help.
No, but and what I tell folks is, great, I can criminalize it. I can take them over to the jail. They can spend a week in there, a week there, and then I want to say to them, do you know how much that cost me?
Right.
If you look at the cost of what we spend when because we use the county jail, and I'm not blaming them. Their costs are their costs. They've got to pay people and feed people and keep it safe.
Jail's expensive.
Right. But that cost has doubled almost even since I've been on the council. And so the cost per day of one person, if I would take that money instead and actually put it towards the resources of helping those people, it would go way farther than the fact that I put you in jail for a week because I criminalized homelessness. You might leave my town. You come back a month later. I arrest you again. And suddenly a month's gone by. I've arrested you a few times. And I've spent way more by keeping you in jail than if I had just said, what's your issue and how can I help you? Right. And that's the piece of it. I tell people, if you just want to be crass about it, okay, that's fine. But look at the economics of it. If that's the way to get you to understand what we're trying to do is, for the people who say criminalize it, I'll do whatever gets you to understand that the cost of that is actually more than the cost of some other options.
And from the humanity side of it too, when someone has something go on and they become homeless and then now they're going into jail.
Yeah,
we've now made it that much more difficult for them to dig back out.
And a problem, and
exactly.
They can't. Yeah, so it leads to lots of other issues, and just banning it doesn't make it go away. We have found that with our camping ordinance. Our camping ordinance is maybe the toughest in the state of Kansas. That's just a fact in terms of how we've done 500 feet. And yes, there's areas we enforce it and don't enforce it because, again, we're trying to be human beings and understand that. But again, that hasn't reduced our homeless population. That tough camping ban hasn't reduced that number by hundreds of people who just said, well, forget Topeka, I'm out of here. They've just found other ways to find other areas we're not sure about or stay around the edges until we find them and they're transient. And so bans don't work either. That's why there has to be a middle ground of helping people, because your point, the humanity piece is utmost importance. But then there's the practical piece of how you do it, and just banning it and criminalizing it hasn't really worked anywhere. It reduces some of the problems, and I get that, but it doesn't solve the underlying issue. And then we still end up paying for it in different ways, through fire issues, through policing issues, through just concern. There's other costs associated with not just dealing with it directly.
When that one thing happens that turns somebody for, their whole situation upside down and they become homeless, do you want to be a criminal for that?
Yeah. Right.
And then it's more expensive.
Right.
How much money can you, if you did put a tiny home village in, would that be cheaper than a prison?
Yeah.
And you've got people who are not trying to break the law. They're just trying to, have some place to go where they're not feeling like
they can get help. They feel safe, and they deserve all those rights too.
Yeah.
They deserve to feel safe and like they've got a place just like the rest of us.
Yeah. So there's no one, answer for anything.
That's a happy note to end things on, man. Look at us.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to throw in there? Any other thing you want to make sure the world knows about, or
I would say this:
point out to people.
Let's say you get elected 4 years down the line. Like, what do you see? What would you want to see for people, and how are we better off?
It's a generic answer, but I think it's the prism we have to look through. Is growth, right? Our population in Topeka has stayed stagnant. The county has grown a little. Now, look. The U.S. population is not growing. So let's start there. It's not like we are not having babies today like we were 30 years ago. And Kansas's population as a whole is not seeing explosive growth. So to say, oh, it's a Topeka problem again is not totally accurate. It's a symptom of the U.S. problem, which is then a symptom of the Kansas problem, which then becomes a symptom of being, but there are pockets of Kansas doing better than us that aren't the capital city. We are the capital city. And I will tell you this. I don't think we act like the capital city enough. I think we sort of have this second class feel sometimes like, yeah, we're Topeka. And I'm like, no, we are the capital city. There's only 50 of us in the United States. Yeah. We need to own that and tell people we are supposed to be the thing in our state because we are the capital city. And I think if we would walk with that swagger a little more and lead with that, we can do some bold things that lead to growth. So I think some of the decisions we make, sometimes my question will be, how does this help us grow as a community? And if it does, great. And if it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but it shouldn't be as high on the list. And so we got to focus on growth. We've got to grow as a community for a lot of reasons. It'll be healthier for us. It'll bring in that tax base. It'll bring new things to our city. It'll bring investment into the community. It'll benefit every pocket of this community. So growth is my prism of which I hope to view the world through as we move things forward.
It's a good answer.
We'll get there. Well, thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And we'll talk about that idea I have and make it happen.
And then
I'm not telling the world about.
And then our stoplight business.
We'll get the stoplights fixed. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.